This is my dog King, and this is the ottoman that he ate. I felt really bad about that, but I don't think he did. My first thought was, oh shoot, but then I remembered I could just make a new one. So the first thing I did was I hopped onto FreeCAD to make a 3D model of a poorly drawn sketch I had made for the design. King helped too before he got bored and left. So this is what I ended up on, kind of a standard stool with these slats across the top. And to make it a little bit more interesting, I wanted to do this triangular leg design with a little kickstand foot at the back. And now that we have our design and our measurements, let's go make this happen. I gathered up a bunch of my scrap wood and started taking measurements, seeing if I could use any of this for the ottoman build without having to rip down any of my leftover boards of maple. I know this is a real cheapskate move, but hey, I'm not doing a lot of sales yet, so I'm trying to save where I can. With the scrap wood, we needed to do a lot of planing and chopping on the miter saw to get things into a shape that we could even start making these pieces. It was definitely a lot more work than, just ripping out pieces from a nice board, but, I had the time and I didn't have to spend the money, so that was a nice perk. I'm starting on these triangular leg assemblies and focusing on this top joint first. We're going to use a lap joint with the material cut out of this vertical piece, since most of the weight on this will come downwards from the top. After we make sure that these laps got nice and flush, which they typically do if you just use your material as a spacer, it's a pretty simple glue up, and King is right next to me going crazy right now. He loves it. But really all I'm doing is making sure that these are nice and flush and at 90 degrees, and they don't need a ton of clamping power. I just use these little clamps to keep them in place while they dry. A little video editing cut in. Kingy said he wants to say hi and he wants to belly rubs. Ooh, yeah, buddy. Hey, give kisses. You're a crazy boy, huh? Yeah, you're a crazy boy. The next step is going to be working on these angular lap joints, which are more tricky because of the differing heights of the wood and because they're at an angle rather than 90. But luckily, with our measurements, we have a 30-degree cut and a 60-degree cut. So all in all, it wasn't too bad. These lap joints are more than fine from a structural standpoint, but one thing I wanted to do was add some visual detail, so I'm going to cut these contrasting plugs and use them as dowels straight through the joint so they're showing on both sides of the joint. And I just thought this would look pretty, and once sanded down it should be nice and flush and just add a nice piece of visual interest. I found it pretty difficult to figure out what I should record and include in here because there are tons of intermediate steps that aren't that interesting. And sanding is not that interesting, but it's so important, and I do so much sanding. So here's a clip of me sanding. I wanted this to have a more organic feel with rounded edges, so I headed over to the router and hit what I could on it for this triangular leg assembly, and the rest we're going to do with sanding later to kind of match that organic rounded look. The kickstand legs attach is just a normal lap joint, so I'm just measuring here to make sure that they're in the same relative position from the either front or the back, depending on which orientation you prefer. And so I'm just measuring here and gluing these up, and then we'll cut them down to final length. With the leg assemblies done, we need to worry about our crossbar here at the back and the slats that are going to go on the top, which is where the cushion is going to sit. So I mark out where I need to stop with my router bit so that this joint is nice and flush. The top slats are going to be made out of this Baltic birch plywood that I had laying around, and we're just going to rip them down to the 6 inches that we needed. And once we get them cut to size, we're going to add some edge banding that we cut off of just the edge of a maple plank that we had, and we're going to glue that up so that it's not super obvious that it is plywood. With all of our pieces finalized, cut, and sanded, it was ready for the glue up. And this was not my favorite glue up of all time, just because you have to get kind of the whole thing in place with the glue, and you're on a little bit of a deadline, and you can't really piecemeal it too easily. You have to get all the slats in. So it wasn't the most fun glue up of all time, but hey, we got it done. I had never used this wipe-on poly before, and when I'm doing projects for myself, I like to experiment with that so I can know what to expect if I'm making a project for a client. And this stuff was pretty easy to apply, and I don't think the result looks as good as the hard wax oil that I typically use, but I'm pretty happy with it overall, especially compared to the spray can. You know, it looks like spray paint, the spray-on poly. That stuff sucks. In the end, I was really happy with how this piece turned out. I think it's fun. I think it fits in the living room really well. I think it looks cool as part of the couch. And, you know, I got to do some new techniques on here. I learned a lot, and, I hope you guys enjoy.